Welcome to the Truth About Your Migraine interview series. Today, I'm beyond excited to be interviewing Susi Hately. Susi is a yoga therapist that I personally have been following for years and have taken a few online courses with. And in her own words, Susi's primary business is hope, possibility, and opportunity for her clients. So how can one not be excited with such a message? So Susi, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit more how you bring all those things into your client's life?
Yeah, that's great. And one thing as I get going into here is I want people just to recognize that I'm in this back shed and I've got the sun coming in through the back. And so sometimes you'll see the sun come in and fade away. So that's this background kind of almost psychedelic experience.
So it's going to add mystery to it.
Yeah. I think so. Just so people are aware of that. I think I have this fundamental belief that nothing's wrong. When people come to see me, I don't see them as being broken, and that has been something that's grown over the years. And so when someone comes in and they have symptoms of migraines, to me, it's their body speaking with them. So it's like any other symptom in my mind, whether someone has flares or when someone has cyclical pain or whether they have symptoms associated with migraine, that their body and mind, for that matter, is having a conversation with them. And what can be a little bit astounding when people first hear that is that doesn't make any sense. Like, this is something that is being done to me. And sure, that can be true for sure. And when we can understand what those symptoms are actually saying, and that might sound kind of weird, but are actually saying, then we can mitigate them much better. What I mean by what they're saying, it's not like we've got a message for you. I don't necessarily follow that train of thought. It's more that something physiologically is going on.
Okay.
And so there's a physiological response that's happening and there's a symptom that's arising. So if we can start to recognize when you have an aura or when you have the pain associated with a migraine, what were the things that were happening in and around that or before that? And when we can start to map out things that were going on in and around that or before that, then you can start to see the trajectory of the experience. And then earlier back, then we can intervene earlier and earlier. So let me give you an example of this. So there is a client of mine who was really interested to figure out how she could mitigate the symptoms associated with migraines. She had migraines since she was 9 years old, would be home from school. She was nauseated, throwing up. Like, it was like she had a really rough go through her childhood and her teen years with migraines. And she's 35 now. So she started to figure out that when she ate eggs, something happened. And there were some symptoms that then led to symptoms that led to symptoms. And earlier, like 10 years ago, she never put two and two together. She just, it was such a minimal, tiny little whisper that just didn't seem to have any correlation. So she just kind of missed it. And then at some point she just went, wait a second, this happens all the time, or at least enough of the time. Maybe I should pay attention to it. So then she took eggs out. Well, guess what? Her rate of migraines went way down fast. So for her, a stimulating factor was something to do with eggs. Now, that's not to say it's for everybody. It might be something else. It may not even be food. It might be hydration. It might be the load of stress. It could be anything. That's what makes this sometimes, depending on how you look at it, it can make it a exploration, and it could sometimes make it a bit frustrating because we're used to in a medical model of here is what happens and it's the same for everybody. And the truth of the matter is it's just not. Like, everybody who has migraines has a migraine, but even the context and the content of the migraine is different from person to person who has that experience. And then what leads up and what contributes to that migraine is different. Even the physiological things that are going on that are contributing to the symptoms are different. So that's where we get to make this a true exploration, if someone's really up for it and willing.
Right. So that's my question. So how do you guide a person, your client, to this exploration, or with, in this exploration?
So I like to think about the body as a barometer. And the reason for that is partly because of my background. I have a degree in kinesiology. I've always been interested in the body. So that when I started working with people, it started with our body. And people would begin to recognize that when they moved, they would hold tension in certain parts of their body that didn't need to be holding tension. And I would ask them, can you move the same way without that tension? So only move as far as that tension doesn't arise. So let's just say, for instance, they were bringing their arms up overhead. And as they brought their arms overhead, they gripped through an area of their body. And so I would say, okay, just move your arms as far as you don't grip through that area of your body. Mm-hmm. So then they could start to see a pattern between a gripping and their movement. And then what would happen is when they only moved as far as they weren't gripping, then their movement started to get better, and they were able to go further, and it just felt better. There was some more ease. So then we would do it with another movement, and then we would do it with another movement, and then they would start to piece together, oh, wait a second. So I'm moving a lot further than I really should be. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yes, so you actually got the range to do this, but in order to do the range, you need to create all this other tension and gripping and bracing and other what I call compensatory strategies in order to do it. So you don't really have the availability to do it. You think you have the availability to do it, and you do when you use these other things, but it's not really the real thing. So then they start to see the relationship, and they begin to see those initial bigger compensations or bigger whispers to let them know they're not quite moving the way they ought to. And then because that was a relatively easy step, then they then say, oh, wait a second. I'm noticing some other things that are occurring. So I start with the bigger pieces that are easily noticeable, and mm-hmm. it's quite organic. It becomes this process of awareness is really interesting when we start at this place where it's easy and it's noticeable and we can integrate it and we get success. Then it bubbles over. So I don't then say to somebody, okay, now when you're out and away from here, I want you to pay more attention to your body, because it naturally starts to happen. So right. More awareness begets more awareness. And mm-hmm. then they start to recognize, okay, if I started to move better when I stopped gripping, and I'm now noticing that this sensation might be related to how my migraine moves along. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can do something over here, and maybe that won't happen. Mm-hmm. So because they had the success early on, then in a bigger thing, then they can apply that to something that might be right, a little bit less tangible.
Right. So because it gets kind of exciting for, it's an investigative work sort of, right? And you notice big things, and then suddenly you become more and more aware of smaller things. So you sort of are the ignition of this process through the body, and then people start paying attention to other things like food or stress or whatever that may be. So that's very cool.
All of us have processes and responses to physiological processes, and when our bandwidth gets strained because there's too much load in our life, or there's high stress, that's another way of saying high stress, mm-hmm. then we're going to respond in certain ways. And so some people, and I'm not saying that stress and migraine, people get migraines because of stress. I'm not saying that at all.
Right.
What I am saying is when the load gets higher, then the responses to things that might be not what we want tend to go up. So for example, when I can think of a client of mine who has a has regular migraine, had a lot of migraines, and then her migraine started to drop down. What she was able to realize is when her parents would come around, her migraines would go up. So then she recognized, okay, well, my parents aren't going to not come around. Like, I can't have that happen. But there's something inside of that relationship, or there's something when that occurs that has a relationship to the migraine. So then she started to do a little bit more self-care earlier before the parents would arrive. And interestingly enough, the migraine started to go down. And and then she was able to do a little bit of work from a counseling and a psychological, mental perspective around the visit of her parents. And so there was a number of things that she unpacked. Now, that was not with me, that was with another professional. And so when she was able to unpack some of that, then the visits also had a relationship to not having less, or to having less migraines. So I think we have these processes and that we all experience. And it's not that we're curing someone from the migraine. We're giving them some power to not necessarily have the experience as often.
Right, I see. Yes. So basically, although you are prone to something, in this case, migraine, but if you're more aware of everything that you're doing, it doesn't necessarily have to be a normal way of living for you. You can make certain adjustments, certain changes in your life, whether it's food or taking care of yourself before your parents come home or whatever it is, so that you minimize this and kind of create an optimal way of living for yourself.
Yes. And when the migraine comes, it's not bad or wrong and you did not fail.
Right. That's a very important message. I love that, because yes, a lot of times especially when you're on the path of finding the solution for your migraine, and every time something works, and then you kind of fall back and you're like, oh my God, I failed again. And it's not true. It's simply not true. You're not failing. It's just another, like you're saying, that message from your system that something is off and you need to look at it.
Yes. And my experience with working with clientele is that they start to uncover the big rocks, like the one client who discovered eggs. And then that got her thinking, well, wait a second, maybe there's these other things around food that have an impact. And she changed her diet completely. And so she was someone who started to see that migraines and food had a strong correlation. Now, that's not the same thing for everybody.
Right.
For other people, it's a combination. For other people, it has to do with the seasons. For other people, the underlying key is that you need to develop the awareness of what are contributing factors, and then start to become a little clearer on what you can do to intervene. And initially, it's a touch and go. It truly is an exploration of seeing what works and what doesn't work, and what helps to get more connected, and then how long that lasts for. I think sometimes when people initially notice that there's a very tangible thing like food, or there's a very tangible thing like sleep, or a very tangible thing like exercise, or keeping suppleness around their neck, or improving their breathing. If there's something very tangible like that, it can be a lot easier. And at the same time, when they stop doing that intervention, or then and the migraine comes back, they're saying, well, see, look, it didn't work. And the thing is, you need to keep at it, because there's a certain physiological process that is the certain trajectory. And if you want to make a shift, then you need to make a shift. And sometimes that can be really challenging. So I will often say, when I train teachers and how I do this, I'll say to them, you need to help your client uncover the compelling reason to even do this, because change is difficult, which is why a lot of people don't do it. And when we become aware of things, it can sometimes be disappointing, because if you're someone who really likes eggs,
yes,
right, it could be really devastating to realize that eggs might not factor into your life. And so initially, it can be easy to throw the hands up and say whatever you want to say, however strong the cuss word is, and just say, forget it. I'm not going to do it. Like, I like my eggs too much.
Mm-hmm.
And that can sometimes be like, that can be really, really challenging. And for those people who have a compelling reason enough of what life can be like if they didn't have the migraine, and if that compelling reason is bigger or more inspiring or more self-serving than having the eggs, then they're likely going to put the eggs to the side. But there's
Mm-hmm.
got to be a reason to stay on the path, because it is this, as we discover, I call them yellow lights, all these little whispers, all these little indicators to let us know how we're doing. I call them the yellow lights, and the yellow lights are little indicators to let you know the red light's coming. So in this case, the red light could be the migraine, or could be the aura, letting you know the migraine is going to come. Because so for so many people, when the aura comes, the migraine is just like, to intervene at that point is really challenging. So when the aura comes, it's like, it's where you're right, the next wave's coming. So if you can start to discover the yellow light before those bigger symptoms come on, and then intervene over here, then this trajectory can start to change. But there's got to be a compelling enough reason to play over here and move this direction, because so much of what we do over here, moving along this way, is fun.
Right, right. And interestingly enough, like pain is not necessarily, or getting rid of pain is not necessarily the compelling reason.
No.
Yeah.
No. And so there's a lot of people out there in the world who live with pain or migraines, and they just, I like to say, they're happy.
Mm-hmm.
And they carry on, and all things are good. And then there's a group of people who are not happy, and they're feeling very burdened by it. And on one level, they don't know that it's possible that by gaining awareness and then starting to kind of play around with, okay, well, I'm noticing this, and I'm noticing this, and I'm noticing this. Well, maybe I'll try this. And then they just start taking note of what the changes are, and to have a guide to help them along is helpful. And then they can realize and have a sounding board back and forth of what they're noticing in terms of patterns, because the power really is in the pattern. And then when it's not just, I've got to intervene on this thing and this thing and this thing, it's when you start to see the overall mix, because in some cases, it might be that the eggs are the problem, but there might be times after the gut heals a little bit more that you can take a bit more egg. You just can't take a lot of egg, right? So that's where it becomes this a bit of a dance, which as people get into it, I know some listeners might be thinking, oh, that's just way too much work. But again, if you start at it and you notice that you have just a little bit longer of a time between migraines, then isn't that worth it? And imagine if you could have this amount of time without a migraine, then that means you can have this amount of time without a migraine.
Right, right.
Because any time that a client has a reduction of pain, or a reduction of or a length of time between migraines that increases, then I know they can have a longer piece of time. Because their body and their physiology has shown me that they were already able to make a gain this way.
Right.
So then it's possible. So I get really excited internally for someone when they say, yeah, I haven't had a migraine for 3 days, and that's new. And I say,
of course.
Yeah, I'm like, awesome. Okay, so if you haven't had a migraine for 3 days, what would it be like if you didn't have a migraine for 5 days?
Right.
And so then they say, ooh, I wonder, and then they start to be able to piece these pieces, and then they're able to piece the pieces together.
Right. And it becomes sort of an investigative challenge too. So like sort of like a game, and then you bring a different kind of energy to it instead of just, oh, let's get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. The energy becomes more like, oh, what if I don't have pain, or what if I do something, and how will it change my pattern? So it really sounds like what you're teaching is a transformative experience, is a transformative process. And as you mentioned, not everybody is ready for it, because for some people it's too much work. So who do you think benefits most? And
that the people who benefit the most are people who understand that they won't get rid of it. because it's a physiological tendency. It's a physiological process that is in your body. So there's some people who, and my husband has psoriasis, for example. Psoriasis is an autoimmune condition. He's had the condition for a lot of years, and he has figured out a whole number of yellow lights and whispers that let him know when a flare is coming. So if you were to look at him, you would not know he has psoriasis. Mm-hmm. And if he were to eat certain foods or to drink alcohol, or if if stress goes up in his life, you will start to see some red poking up. So when his skin looks terrific, and it can flare. When I met him, he had a lot of red on his skin, and he had a lot of flare. And to him, it was just like, this is just what it is. This is just what it is, right? Like, I can't do anything about this. And then he started to figure it out. So the psoriasis is not going away. He's not getting rid of the physiological process that leads to this thing called psoriasis. So I would say the same thing about anything else, is that we're not getting rid of anything. Like, if you think about a memory you had when you were 4 or 5, you can feel that memory, whether it's a positive memory or a negative memory. You can feel that memory in your body, or in your mind, there's a visceral kind of kinesthetic feel that's there, and maybe even hear sounds, and you can read it. You can think about the whole thing is there. So that doesn't go away, right? When you have a physiological response that leads to something like a migraine, that is part of your makeup. So that's not going away. So if you're someone who understands that, or has that belief, I should say, because it's an approach and it's a model of how I work. If you have that belief, then this kind of approach is going to be for you.
People come for a specific solution, and then suddenly they see that there is no prescribed model. It's something very individual. It's very transformative, but it's your transformation, and you don't even know how it's gonna unravel. You ignite it, and then it goes on its own, right?
And for somebody who is willing to explore their body and the power of their body, then we would have a really fun time. I think a big piece that happens, I know, in my part of the world, is there are a lot of ads on TV that say, I'm not going to let my body stop me. I'm going to use this medication to not let my body stop me. And there's a certain time and place for that in my mind. And it leaves the message to say, your body does not have infinite wisdom. This pain is just the way it is. So you might as well just, take this pill and get on with your life, and because this is never going to go away. And I think that's really too bad, because it leaves this residue that our bodies are kind of dumb, and they're these inert objects where I haven't seen that to be true. I've seen so many times people being able to become more aware. And when they become more aware, it's like they're pressing the restart button on their computer. So way back when we had to defrag our computers and all that, or when you even see it now, when a process in your computer doesn't work, you just press the start button, and it comes back and it's anew. And so we have this thing that's what we need to do in our bodies. And for me, it's awareness. The awareness helps bring up the things that we need to shift and change. That all happens in the computer when we press the reset button. In our case, we just don't press the reset button, go quiet and come forth again. We actually have to do the work. And if you're up for it, then it's really fun. And initially it can be hard, but the end result is really fun and very, very worthwhile.
Right. So do you have a lot of, or have you had a lot of clients with migraines over the years?
We have a headache clinic here in Calgary, and we have a lot of people coming in from the headache clinic. Again, the people who tend to be referred are people who they want to get back to activity, or they're having some trouble sleeping, and they want to practice and play with yoga. And so typically the folks over at the headache clinic, they'll refer over to me when the person has a interest or idea that they want to do more activity or yoga, and that's the context that they that they tend to refer.
And then they come to you, and then they receive this gift of hope, not only in the migraine department, but in general. And I think this is what it is. It's such a gift, because a lot of times when you are in excruciating pain, it's very tempting to resign. Oh, nothing works. It is what it is. That's it. I might as well take. I have nothing against prescription medication. I take it myself. It doesn't really help me. But sometimes I'm just, you know what, I might as well, why not? But the main point of your message is, do not resign. There is hope. There is always possibility. And you can find it through all this little yellow lights that you're talking about. That's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. So I understand that besides this beautiful gift of your hopeful message, you have another free gift for us. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I go more deeply into what I've been sharing here through a presentation that I recorded for you, where people can learn about my approach and I can take you through a bit of more of a process for you to start to uncover for yourself. So it's not a very long presentation, and it will give you the initial starting oomph to start to explore and to start to play with it. The key factor, I think, is if you recognize that you have the power to change, then this will be something that will be of interest to you, I think. If there's a resignation of there is no way, then it might be a little bit more of a challenge. So I still encourage you to listen to it. It just might be harder to feel into, I think.
Right. So yes, guys, by the way, the free gift, Susi's free gift, is the link to it is right below this video, so you can grab it anytime. And I hope, and I am fairly sure that you are the one that wants to change, and that's why you're listening to this series, because you know that there is some possibility out there that exists, whether you know about it yet or not, but there is definitely hope. So is there anything else you would like to add, or do you think we kind of covered, summarized it all for our viewers already?
I think the key thing is that there are so many ways in, and you've got other speakers in this series that have an approach, and we've all had success, and every service that's out there has had success. And the key is to recognize that each of these approaches are stimuli, they're interventions. And so what you get to explore is what they feel like when you do that intervention and what it feels like in your own body. And then for you to measure of whether it worked or didn't work. And when you can take on that type of thinking, then your chance for success goes much, much higher. So don't take my word or anybody else's word, for that matter, about what works and what doesn't work. It's your opportunity is for you to try what resonates initially, to try it out, and then to notice if there's been an impact. Because you ought to be able to see an impact in terms of a shift pretty quickly if it's the right thing. And then when it's not the right thing, you should see an impact pretty quickly. So it really becomes an opportunity for you to explore and to recognize that there's been success with everything that's out there. There's been success with a certain kind of person, with certain sort of symptoms, with certain sort of patterns. And then that's where you get to kind of listen and really trust your gut and your heart of what resonates and what doesn't resonate, and then follow that. And then see where that leads you.
Right. I really, really love this message, because a lot of times we give ourselves to the mercy of whatever approach we're trying, right? But it's not. You talk a lot in your courses about uh, power with versus power over.
Mm.
So a lot of times when you have pain, you feel like you want to give yourself, to somebody to fix, right? And it's not going to work. Only when you are participating in your own transformation process, only then something is going to work, and
Yeah,
what's right and what's wrong. So thank you so much for this message as well.
you're
It's really
welcome.
important. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Susie. I am so honored, and it's such a privilege to have you here and to share your beautiful message with the viewers. And thank you so much, guys, for watching, for caring enough about yourself to be open to all sorts of messages, to all sorts of approaches, and taking Susie's suggestion, just go explore them all and see what works for you, what doesn't, and take it from there.
Thank you very much, Maria, for having me.
Thank you.